Hello, Heinrich back with another Sunday serving, words of hope and truth from the gospel. Do you sometimes feel confused or hopeless or discouraged about life, about your situation, about the direction of our world, our society, of course our politics, our religion, our faith? And do you wish that we could do better as a people, as neighbors, as communities, as a country, and even as a world? I'm sure we all do at times. You know, the way things are should make us a little upset, but not discouraged. Well, encouragement, we all look for encouragement. That comes from hearing and understanding what Jesus says about how life should and can be. Of course, that beautiful and good paradigm is the kingdom of God, the rulership of God. What is the kingdom of God? It's not far off. We can seek for it and learn about it and even put it into practice here and now in this world. You know, many places in the gospel, Jesus teaches about the kingdom of God. He usually uses stories or parables to help us understand it better. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire men to work in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard to work. So remember, we talked about this last time, a denarius is 1 day's typical wage for a laborer in Jesus' time. So that was a fair wage. It wasn't overpaying, but it was fair. It was a good, decent wage. Work is work. At least you're getting paid and you can provide for your family. Jesus goes on. About the third hour, he went out again and saw others standing in the marketplace, doing nothing. He told them, "You also go to work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again at about the 6th hour, and again at the 9th hour, and did the same thing. About the 11th hour, he went out and found still others standing around. And he asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. So he said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." So the landowner, of course, Jesus is implying in this parable that God is the landowner. He really wanted to get busy. He had a lot of work to do in his vineyard. And he was ready to hire anyone. He went out 5 or 6 times to the people sitting around outside the supermarket and the Walmarts, anyone that needed work, and he told them, "Hey, come work for me, and I'll pay you whatever is right." So he must have had a pretty good reputation around town because the workers signed up without writing a contract. So let's go on here. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." Now, that's interesting. Why did he start paying the ones he hired last first? There must be a reason. Let's try to figure it out. The workers who were hired at about the 11th hour came, so the last workers came, and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These men who you hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the hard work of the day and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "Friend, I'm not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for 1 denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the man who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" Then he ended with these words, very important words. "So the last will be first, and the first will be last." Wow, that's an interesting story. The boss paid them all the same wage, 1 denarius. Since a denarius was a decent laborer's wage, let's say it's about $200, right? $20 an hour for 10 hours, a bit below the average U.S. salary, because they were laborers after all. So you can understand those who worked all day for the agreed upon salary were a bit miffed when the workers who had only worked 1 hour were also paid $200. But the owner pointed out that it was his business if he wanted to be generous. He wasn't being unfair to the original employees. He was just being extra generous to the newbies, to the latecomers. Is that unfair? Well, whether or not we think it's unfair or if it's fair, Jesus is saying that in God's kingdom, this is fair. This is the way the workers will be treated. As long as we agree and come to work at the vineyard, we will be taken care of with generosity. That's what preachers call grace, right? God's grace. And God's grace sometimes seems unfair to those who take it for granted for themselves because they think they're good or holy or hardworking. It's very important how Jesus ended this parable with those words, so the last will be first and the first will be last. But I don't think Jesus wants us to rush to the back of the line or to be lazy and sit around waiting until the end of the shift to do a little bit of work. But he does want to teach us to be generous and to rejoice in generosity, to rejoice in his grace to other people. As long as those latecomers do come and are willing to work, they will get the same wage. They will get their denarius. All of us who are lucky enough to work in his vineyard will get a denarius. So this parable reminds me of a friend who recently called me up and asked me to pray for and to ask our community, our church, our congregation to pray for a little 8-year-old girl, the daughter of his friend. And this little girl's in critical condition after suffering a stroke. Now, that's not an unusual request. And of course, we prayed for this dear little girl. But what was surprising and what was unusual was that this friend that asked for the prayer is a lifelong and avowed atheist. In fact, he not only says that he doesn't believe in God, but he told me that he hates the thought of a creator God who could make such an evil and cruel species as ours that always gets caught up in wars and violence and killing. So that's why he's an atheist. So if he's an atheist and he doesn't believe in God, why did he ask me? Why did he ask my church for a prayer for this girl? And not only that, then a couple weeks later, he got back in touch and he wanted to thank and he wanted to tell us that this little child was improving. So is my atheist friend coming to the vineyard? Is his request for prayer agreeing to work in the vineyard? Will he get paid a denarius from the owner? Is he maybe one of the last that will be first? I don't know the answer to that, but I know that Jesus could answer that, especially if he met my friend. I'm sure they would get along great. But maybe this parable has something to say to us about that. One thing I do know, there is a lot of hope in this parable. So let's get to work and spread the good news about the owner of the vineyard, about God, about Jesus, about his generosity and his grace for anyone who will come and work to help get the harvest in. That is kingdom work. So thank you for listening, and God bless you all.